welcome you. Yeah, this All right, there we go. Hello, hello. I'm so excited to have you all here. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Morning, afternoon, wherever you're hailing from. Really excited to have you. So today we're going to have a lecture on racism and mental health. Truly joyful to have you here today. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. Of course, things want to shut down. It's been a day, y'all. We're trying to figure out the technology, but we've got this. I'm super excited. There we go. All right. Okay. We are going to share this screen. There we go. All right. So there we go. All right. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. We're going to use the chat for questions and reflections. If you feel safe to do so, I'm going to be talking about racially discriminatory situations. And I want to know if you've experienced something like that or if you've heard something like that. So if you are connecting with the slides, feel free to be in the chat and let us know what your experiences are. We've got a lovely intern that's sitting on my couch over here who's doing some moderating. So of course we want to be respectful. We want to ensure that we are honoring ourselves and the space, but we're just really excited to have you here today. And most importantly, I'm really grateful that you are here, and make sure if you want to hear more of these mental health goodies that you are subscribing to the YouTube channel. We crossed over the 200 person mark today. So we're really excited to collect yet another milestone in this YouTube journey. So again, welcome everyone. All right, let's get moving. What we're going to be talking about today is racism. So let's start off with what it is. The second thing to think about is how it affects our mental health. Then I'm a solutions-oriented gal, so I want to know what works. And then I also want to think about what's next, what the future holds for us in this space. But you might want to know who I am first, right? You're like, who is this person saying that they want to talk about racial discrimination or racism, and why on God's green earth should I listen to her? So just a few quick notes on who I am. So I am Dr. Rihanna Elise Anderson. I'm an expert in improving mental health of Black youth facing racism. As a tenured professor at Columbia and a licensed clinical psychologist trained at UVA, Penn, Yale, Stanford, and Harvard, and of course, University of Michigan, go Blue, and with 20 early career awards from every top child and psychology organization, and from theory to measurement to applied practice, I have improved the well-being of countless Black youth through hundreds of publications, thousands of citations, hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants, and millions of views and listens across CNN, PBS, TED, and NPR. I hail from the west side of Detroit and now frolic in West Harlem, bringing both academic depth and real-world compassion to my work. Translation, I'm good on any MLK Boulevard, both through my scholarship and in my service. So welcome. It's really great to have you. I hope that you are locked in and ready to learn a bit about our field. All right. So again, what is racism? This is the question that brings us to the table today. Now, the first thing to know is that when we're talking about racism or these levels of racially specific behaviors, policies, and treatments that folks engage in with each other, and particularly against folks of color, you'll see that there is a hierarchy or thoughts of how these impact us across different levels or systems. So there's this individual element, what's happening to me as a person and what I need to do to experience my psychological well-being, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But there are deeper levels than that. So it can be social and cultural, what's happening around me, institutional, what's happening at levels that are above me, so what's guiding even the spaces that I inhabit, and systemic or structural. So what's going on so much and so long that it's really in the foundation of everything that we do. So let me walk you through a few examples of what this can actually look like. We'll start with the top, the structural and systemic. And for the sake of our mental health, I'm not going to show this video, but in the news recently, there has been this viral video of a woman who was set to or was in labor and was set to give birth very soon. She is wailing, and in the background, if you can see, there's someone at a computer who's very casually conducting an intake, asking her questions while she is screaming. She's standing and holding the chair, or the wheelchair that she's being pushed in. Now, what we know is that this person did end up giving labor, going into labor 12 minutes later. But if you saw the video, the contrast between what this woman is experiencing and what this person who's doing her intake, it's shocking to see that contrast. So one might say, well, this is just one person's experience. How is it that it's a systemic or structural or, again, foundational racial problem? Well, what we know is that this woman's case is not particular just to her. And in fact, maternal health for Black women is one of the greatest concerns for our physical and mental health that we can name. And looking at charts like this, where you're seeing that the rate is not getting better. So the things that we know to do within hospital settings, within healthcare settings, are not improving and are worsening for Black women. That is not only a physical health problem, but a mental health concern, as we know that Black women are terrified going into situations like these hospital settings where they are due to give birth. And it can impact their psychological wellness around the entire time of pregnancy, which is a dual effect of what can happen to her, but also what can happen to the baby. So we're mindful of these structural issues that are happening, not just to that one woman, but across hospitals and across structures here in the United States. Scooting down to institutional. So again, what are the policies that are impacting what institutions take up and the different practices that they have here in the United States in particular? There was an executive order passed on January 21st that, quote, ended illegal discrimination and restored merit-based opportunities. Now, that had cascading effects to a number of practices that happen. So again, it's not just that it's an executive order or a policy, it's what ends up trickling down and what are the effects of that. And in fact, why we're even here today is a direct link to that institutional challenge. So you'll see, for example, this email where I was corresponding with someone about a talk I was supposed to be giving right now with a national organization, where unfortunately, due to, in light of what's happening with that executive order, we can just kind of skip down to the second paragraph. We had hoped to maintain the words racial resistance and racial discrimination, but the leadership within that organization wanted to retract it. They wanted to take away the word racial resistance and racial in front of discrimination. So those things needed to be removed from the talk. And as you'll see, as I continue to talk about the importance of racial discrimination and racial socialization and Black youth, as you hear me talk about these structures and factors, these are not things that can simply be removed, right? So what happened at an institutional policy level is impacting my science, my ability to even conduct the research that I have been tasked to do today. And now we're at this interpersonal and social level, right? So we're thinking about, again, what's happening across these greater health-related issues as structures, what's happening within institutions and across organizations as institutional level. And now we're coming down to the person to person or the interpersonal level. So this young lady, her name is Rihanna Curtin, and I did not choose her just because her name is also Rihanna, but this young lady, Rihanna Curtin, is telling Nicole Hannah-Jones about a story that happened regarding one of her first days of school. So take a listen to the different things that Rihanna mentions.
Like my first week there, this girl, she tried me like, how can I say this? She ain't know me and I ain't know her. And she was trying to fight me over nothing. Like because she ain't like my presence, she wanted to fight me. And she called me a black bitch and a nigga who wasn't gonna know nothing, who was stupid and ghetto and trashy. So I'm like, I'm not gonna fight you. And then I get kicked out and then you look like you're right.
Was that the first time you've been called that word by a white person?
Yeah.
What did that feel like?
I felt like somebody was stabbing me in my back. Like it really hurted.
So when we're thinking about the experience that Rihanna just had, she's going through challenges at a school setting with another student who is talking about her, calling her names, but the experience that she goes on to describe, it feels like someone stabbed me in the back, is the lane that we're going to pick up on in just a bit when we think about the psychological process of racial discrimination. Before we get there, what I want to pick up on with what Rihanna just told us is that discrimination doesn't happen in just one place. So we've already learned that from the talk thus far. It happens in hospitals, it happens in universities and research centers, it happens in schools. But take a look at what this is one of my favorite visual descriptions, but again, Rihanna said it beautifully. She's wondering how she's going to interact with someone, because if something happens to her, it's not just her education, it's her getting suspended, and maybe then it shows up on a job record, and there's this cascading or interacting effect. And this figure here really demonstrates that beautifully, that you have all of these different systems that are interacting and reinforcing discrimination. So everything we've talked about thus far doesn't impact just the individual. It is reinforced on the individual, and then that individual's decision or thinking or behaviors, all of that then cascades back out to these systems. So they're so intertwined, so interconnected, and so interlocked. And Rihanna gave us a really good description of what happens socially, what the greater sociological construct is. But y'all, I really want to get us to think about, well, why is it something that we need to think about? What makes it such a debilitating experience? Well, when 90% of Black youth are reporting the racial experiences that Rihanna just told us about, then we know that it's very frequent. And so the question is, what about that frequency contributes to the lane that we're talking about of psychology? So let's start to lean into that a little bit. Well, racism and mental health is not just what happens to us, but it's our attitudes, emotions, and behaviors and how they're impacted by racism and racial discrimination. So again, Rihanna sets us up perfectly to understand that this discriminatory experience happened to her. And all of these different levels that we've talked about, personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural, they're really at play in so many discriminatory experiences. What is it about the history of education and segregation that led to Rihanna needing to be bused in the first place? What is it about the teacher's attitudes or the principal's attitudes that may contribute to whether she's suspended or not? What are the behaviors and the beliefs of the person she was talking to that could talk to her in that way? What was she taught as a young person? And finally, and again, most importantly and most crucially for what we're going to be talking about today, how did it impact Rihanna? Her description that it felt like I was being stabbed in the back is the level that we think about from a psychological perspective. So how does racism affect mental health? We've heard that really visceral description. It felt like someone was stabbing me in the back. Well, y'all, discrimination is detrimental. There's really no easier way to say it. All of the literature shows us that if you have increased levels of racial discrimination, you're going to have higher levels of mental and physical health problems. But you don't have to take it from me. Take a look at all of these different outcomes that the literature really shows a close relationship with. Again, the higher degree of discrimination, the more experiences we have, the more someone talks to me online or at school or in person, the more those experiences happen. So the frequency, the more we have that frequency, it's likely that the bother that we experience from it is going to go up too. In all of these psychological, physiological, physical, academic, all of these outcomes, we know that discrimination is detrimental to the health and well-being of individuals, and particularly Black youth. So I'm moving us pretty quickly through, because what I would love to do today is to talk with you all about what works and what's next, and really to get questions from you all. We could belabor the point of how bad racism is. And I'm sure there are so many experiences that you all have had that can go in this chat and that you can tell me about. And I hope that you are thinking about what to share, if you feel safe to do so, about what resonates for you. But I really want to take us to what my colleagues and I have been doing in the past decade on what works and what we're looking forward to in the future as we get our discussion going at the end as well. So I'm someone who considers themselves an interventionist. So I intervene. I think about the problem like racial discrimination and how it predicts these psychological, mental health, well-being, all of these issues at the end. And I'm not satisfied with just knowing that. I want to know what we can do about it. So I lovingly refer to what I do as drop kicking, right? So I think about what thing can drop kick or intervene or interrupt or disrupt the relationship between discrimination and outcomes. And the thing that we have landed on in our field of study is racial socialization. And what the heck is that? I'm sure you want to know. So it is the talk, more colloquially, the talk. Folks who are on this call that I know deeply and personally have had experiences with their parents, with adults, with their peers who have talked to them about the ways that race and racism play out in our society, right? So it's really just a conversation or actions that folks have with young people about how race and racism operate in the greater society. It's often between parent and child, but not exclusively so. So my colleague and I, and we're very corny, and this is a very old video, so bear with us, but my colleague and I have a discussion on what this talk can look like, and I'm going to play just a bit of it here. Oh, man.
Reed, what's got you worked up today?
Man, it's another one of these headlines talking about a young kid killed by a police officer or a dang on vigilante.
Man, I don't know what it would have been like to have race all in our face like that growing up.
You mean like the O.J. Simpson trial or the L.A. riots or Rodney King?
Snap, man. I didn't even think about the fact that young kids can pick up on race like that.
Yeah, I mean, by 3, kids are starting to see differences in the race. By 7, they're making meaning of those differences. And by 10, they're starting to think about their own role in that difference.
If only there were a way for parents and children to talk about race effectively.
But there is. So racial socialization is all about the way that parents teach kids about the racial world around them.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure I follow. What do you mean by the whole socialization thing?
Yeah, well, you know how we tell kids to look both ways before they cross the street or not to talk to strangers, right? So racial socialization is about race specifically. I bet you can even think about a few things that your families. So Dr. Reed there says, I bet you can think of a few things that your family has said and done with you. So I actually want to just pause for a moment and get y'all in the chat. What are the things that you can think of that your family has done with you about racial socialization? So in the chat, let me know a few things that you remember your parents saying, or family members or friends. Let me know about the experiences that you had. Go ahead and drop those in the chat. While you're thinking, I'm going to shout out my mom who is here. My mother was someone who ensured that we were wearing kente cloth, that we had Maasai warriors and like sculptures and books in our house. It was everywhere I looked, and everything that I feel like we did ensured that there was connectivity to my culture. And so I just want to shout out my mom who is in the chat already here. So let me know what y'all are experiencing or what you remember growing up and experiencing regarding the talk or racial socialization. All right. So Brittany Sanders Rhodes says, my mom only purchased Black dolls for me. And a quick shout out to this person who now is ensuring that other Black children know about who they are through their ability to learn and master math skills, right? So she knows that it's important for young people to know who they are and have a good sense of self. So I wonder if the things that her mom did are now showing up in the way that she lives, operates, and even runs her own business. So thank you for that. I see other folks. So as a daughter of immigrants, and unfortunately it got cut off. Can you see the rest of that comment? Okay. Maybe Fong, you press enter a little too quickly. But okay, so Jessica, you're indicating these things that, yes, we hear all the time. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far. A lot of Black art. So again, I resonate with that. Interesting. So Ashley notes that the consideration around even what her name was a thoughtful move around ensuring that she would be competitive in a job market. So that's really interesting. Fantasy notes. My mom said that any report I had to do for school had to be on a famous African American on the island of Puerto Rico. Yes, yes. So Fong, thank you for finishing up there. So the talk was not just a comprehensive talk, but always just be grateful we're here and keep your head down. So yes, it shows up in different ways. The content that folks share with their young people can show up in different ways. Sometimes it can be really thoughtful, comprehensive, and sometimes it can be very declarative. Just put your head down and keep it moving. And I'll just look at this last one. Thank you so much. So no one was allowed to touch my hair besides my mother and other Black hairstylists. That is a huge one. So hair, interactions with police, interactions with teachers, these are things that we know to be tried and true content elements of the talk. So thank you all so much. Feel free to keep jotting them down, but I'm going to move on just a bit with our conversation. So what is racial socialization? Again, all of the things that you all have said, the behaviors, the conversations, the things that parents are really thoughtful about with respect to race and racism are showing up in these conversations. Now, this might look like I'm using the same slide again, and that there might be a mistake, but actually 90% of Black families report using racial socialization. So if that sounds really familiar with what I said just a moment ago, that 90% of Black youth experience racial discrimination, you're right. There is this really interesting concordance with respect to how frequently parents are talking to their young people about race and racial discrimination and how often young people are experiencing it. So we know that it's on the minds of Black families, that folks are constantly working together to reduce that experience that young people are facing. And I'll just note very quickly here that the literature actually shows that not only Black families, but all families tend to be a bit delayed in the conversation that they're having with young people. So young people might start noticing or feeling or experiencing race at, say, 3 to 5, and parents are starting maybe for the first time to pick up 2, 3, 4 years later. So young people have already figured out elements of race and racism, and often we're behind the ball on that. But it is really exciting to know that there's a concordance, that 90% of young people are experiencing it, 90% of families are having these conversations and doing things about it. So why should we racially socialize? Well, in the meme that my friends made of me at my TED Talk, this is all about reparation. So going back to repair and preparation. So how is it that we can mend some of the wounds that our young people have already experienced? That is what we may even have that gap in talking to them about their experiences, that 2-3 year gap. We need to do some repair of what they are experiencing in the past, but we can also prepare them for a future. What is it that they're going to face in the future, and how do we work with them to ensure that they know how to handle the situation moving forward? There's one more clip that I want to show here, because I'm obviously a proponent of racial socialization, of having these conversations. And again, the literature is really clear. And I want to make this point very, very clear, that the more competent or the more skills that we have, and we'll get to that in just a bit, the more we're able to talk to young people about race and racism, that is not hide it, not sweep it under the rug, not be silent about it. The more we can have these conversations with young people, the better off their psychological well-being. So why would folks not want to racially socialize? I'm going to show just a quick clip of a video that will give you a bit of insight as to why some parents may not want to do that and my response to them.
But your child is going to face racial discrimination. Yeah. And so the question is, how can you be the best supportive system for them to ensure that what discrimination does, which is to break down virtually every single psychological, physiological, physical, academic, we can name every single outcome that discrimination messes up, but it's a lot of them. So if you don't want discrimination to jack your kid up, which left alone it might do, you want to intervene, and that intervention is racial socialization. Very briefly too, Sean was saying that every parent should racially socialize. Every parent does racially socialize. So if you're quiet, if you're not saying anything about race, you are socializing your child to believe that the world can do its worst to your child, and that you're not going to do anything about it, and that people like you aren't going to do anything about it either. So it's incredibly important for you to verbalize and to explicitly indicate how you feel and how you want your child to feel about race.
Okay, so folks may be thinking that if I don't talk to my kids about race, then they're not going to have to deal with these challenging outcomes in life. But what I make a point there, and this was a few years ago working with one of our partners, Embrace Race, so shout out to them. When we think about what happens when we don't give guidance, you're allowing media, you're allowing other people, you're allowing the world to give context to what's happening to your child rather than working specifically with them to guide their own thoughts on what it can be. So we are constantly racially socializing, whether we think we are or not. So my experience as a psychologist and a family and child psychologist at that is to work with parents and family members and youth themselves to ask, what is it that you actually want them to get out of this? What do you want them to know? How do you want to protect their psychological well-being from the ills of the world? So even if you think you're protecting them by not socializing, by keeping them safe, by keeping them away from some of these negative thoughts that might be in the world, what we're really excited about is that we can help to provide some concrete strategies to socialize. So let's get into them. All right, y'all. So there are 3 things that my colleagues and I have come up with that can help you to use racial socialization effectively. And they're pretty simple. So confidence, skills, and stress. I know that everyone on this call has probably seen something online that's like, here are the 10 ways to ensure that your child doesn't get like, and again, forgive my language, but like hurt by a police officer or something like that. Like there are so many things that people say that sound very easy about these conversations, and there's no prescription. There are no right things that children can say or do to remain safe or to have agency in every situation. But what we have learned through our countless studies is to think about what parents can do in these conversations to ensure that they have greater confidence. And one of the ways that you can build up your confidence is to have resources around you that you are using to practice what it is that you want to say to your child. So you can use, spoiler, ChatGPT to create a conversation on how you want to talk to your kiddo about race. Use it for good, right? Like how can you create a situation that reduces some of the pressure that you might feel having that talk with your child for the first time so that your confidence can be boosted through practice. So that's step 1. Practice, practice, practice. It doesn't matter if you're using a chat bot, if you're using your journal, just get it out and start that experience so that it's not the first time and you're feeling nervous talking to your kiddo. Accompanied with that is skills. So what are the ways that you can boost your skills to talk to your young person? Having resources around you. I will apologize. I did not come up with an updated list. So many of the lists that I have been using, unfortunately, have been struck down by a lot of the executive orders that I even showed you earlier today that are taking some of these resources out of the websites that we've compiled over the years. But if you do email me at the end, I promise I will give you my resource list that is more updated. But the skills that we can use as parents, family members, those who love our children is plentiful, and it's free and it's all around. So we've created tons of compendiums of resources, like I said already, through Embrace Race, for example. There are websites that exist that you can get book recommendations, song recommendations, movies, so many things that will give you tools and skills to broach that subject with your young person. So maybe it's not you just saying, I saw this thing. Can you tell me how you feel about it? You can say, this character in this book experienced something really tough. Can we talk about that? And that opens the door, right? Or you can use the news as a free resource to say, that really bothered me as someone who's watching it. How do you feel about that? So there are ways that you can broach or open the door, and that's where our skills can be strengthened. And finally, stress. So again, it's kind of combines a few of the things that we talked about. But if this is your first time, if you're trying to go into it, if maybe you're upset and angry and feeling it, that might be a very stressful situation, not just for you, but for your kiddo as well. So how do we reduce the stress that we have talking to our young people? We can spend some time before talking with them, journaling. We can look in the mirror. We can talk to ourselves. We can even go back if we need to reduce some of the stress that might be lingering from our childhood. If your folks are still with you, or if you have siblings and something didn't quite get worked out even in your own childhood, how can you reduce some of the stress that you're feeling about this being such a momentous task by releasing some of that through conversations with other people, or with unpacking it perhaps in a journal. So those are some of the ways that your confidence can be built up. You can grab some skills and you can reduce your stress before having conversations with your child. And let me also just note that these are not one talk, right? These are a series of conversations. I encourage families often to think about a day of the week where you're going to have a tough convo, and you put challenging topics inside of a hat or inside of a vase, and you know that you're going to pick something out. And so you can have these really tough things that you are preparing your family for by making it a ritual, making it a part of meal Mondays with each other, or family Fridays, something like that, that we know we're going to tackle tough stuff, but we can and we will, and we'll keep coming back to it. So those are a few practical take-home skills for how to use racial socialization. All right, so if you are asleep, if you need to go to your next class, if you are done with lunch and you needed to dip out right now, the takeaway so far is that the more competent we are with racial socialization, the more we reduce Black youth mental health problems. So the better you are at having higher confidence, having more skills, reducing that stress, the more competent you are having these conversations with Black children, the better off their mental health. And that's for all of us, right? Parents, therapists, family members, colleagues, like whoever we are to Black young people, the more and the better we are at talking with them about it, the better off they are. So walk away knowing that. But if you want to stick with us, and I would encourage you to do so, let's think about some of the ways that can show up in the work that we've done. So we have created some programs, my colleagues and I have created some programs to try to address some of these mental health concerns that young people have experiencing racism within therapeutic solutions. So I want to start with a very brief clip of what Embrace is. Embrace is, well, let me let the video say it. I was going to give you a little spoiler, but let me let the video explain what our first program is.
About what are the things that Black families are doing already to cope with what's going on in the world. There's a huge literature about this. So people are talking about, this is what Black families are doing. Then I'm a therapist and I'm like, well, why don't we marry those two things? Why don't we take the talk, bring it to therapy, and give families the space to unpack all of the stuff that they're bringing into these spaces that we normally don't ask about, right? So we normally say, what's bothering you? What's the issue? Oh, I'm feeling low. I'm feeling sad. But has there been a space where you could say, George Floyd being knelt on for 8 minutes and 46 seconds pissed me off? Is that a thing that you can actually bring to therapy? And that's not something that we were seeing existed. So Embrace was this program that we developed to allow Black families to have the space to have these conversations in a therapeutic manner that they can then take home and say, I have skills now to not only talk about it like we were already doing, but to make it a therapeutic practice. How does it feel, son, to see that? How does it feel, daughter? How does it feel, partner, to have that on my back, to see it every day? So that's where Embrace came from. And that's something that we're really working overtime on right now to get to as many families as possible, to get those skills and to unpack that stress.
So Embrace is a 5-session family-based intervention, or a therapeutic program that promotes the things that we've already been talking about. So engaging in what can be really challenging, racially charged conversations. How do we bring racial socialization into the therapeutic room? Then how do we manage what we're experiencing? So the processing and managing of racial stress, which can be really challenging on our own if left to our own device. And finally, how do you do that and continue to bond? So how do you strengthen your family relationship in the midst of really challenging things that parents and children are unpacking in a therapeutic space? Well, the great thing that we have found out is that what we've hypothesized about what embrace would do has actually shown up in the literature, in our studies, in our case reports. So, yes, parents do have greater racial socialization competency, but not just parents, the young people themselves. So, the more they are leaning into those conversations, they feel more competent. And not just parents and children, but therapists as well. So we have clinicians who are learning how to talk about race more effectively through our work, which means that we're hitting different levels. So it's not just family engagement, not just individuals. This is now getting to a higher level of intervention. We're thinking about how to change some mental health training so that they are more competent in conversations with Black families, which is totally necessary. It also shows that children have greater coping efficacy. I know that that's a mouthful, but really what we're saying is if a young person thinks that they can do something about the situation, that means that they will be able to do something about that situation. So many of us, and I'm reading the chat when I'm playing those videos, I'm seeing what happened to us in our younger age and what our parents did and didn't do to get us where we are today. But if young people don't think that they have agency, I can't talk to my teacher about this because nothing's going to happen. That police officer really made me feel small and I don't have any recourse. If you don't think that there's anything that you can do about it, you're going to be eaten up. You're going to experience internalizing issues, and that leads to depression, anxiety, etc. But what we find is that if they have greater coping efficacy, that means they think they can do something about it, they do something about it, and that leads to better psychological outcomes. Those psychological outcomes, again, are a chain effect. So what we do in these conversations makes them feel more efficacious. It leads to better outcomes for these young people. So the hypothesis that we had, this theory that we have about how all of these relationships play together, actually bore out in our studies. But don't take it from me. Take a listen to what Ben has to say about his experience.
Embrace helped me open up about some racial situations that actually happened to me. And it served as a support group for what I was thinking. It helped me think through what I was thinking. And it also served as a catalyst for conversations strictly about race instead of having race as the subtext of a conversation.
Now, obviously, Ben is a genius, and there's not much that I did to lend him that credibility. But what he's saying is there is a space for us to actually unpack this that therapy often doesn't lend itself to. So we're really grateful that Embrace can be one of those resources. We also engaged in virtual reality and games for change with some young people. And what I want to show you here, it might be small on your screen, so let me try to unpack it. There's a young person who's at the computer and they're typing, "Hey, Leah, will you join me in the protest?" To their right, there's a Black Lives Matter poster that essentially we would assume is for this protest. And this young person is likely in school, as you can see the backpack to the left of them. Now, this doesn't give you a ton of information, but let me give you a bit of a backstory. The young person who made this narrative, so this is a part of a narrative game that they created through some collaboration with my colleagues and I at MIT. They were able to come into this program not believing that they had the ability to do anything about racism. So remember in the last slide, we were just talking about if young people don't feel like they can do anything about it, they won't. So that young person believed that they had no agency, nothing that they could do about race and racism. And they said, in fact, when it comes to my younger brother, like he's going to experience the same thing. None of this even matters. But by the end of this program, where we just gave them the tools to learn how to code and how to create these narrative spaces, this young person changed from not believing they could do anything to going to a protest, to inviting someone to that protest with them. So this person made a pretty substantial behavioral change just in a matter of weeks, being able to create this narrative space, this world of suspending beliefs, of suspending reality, so that these young people can actually say, this is what I would want to do if we could do something about racism. So that's what VR and Games for Change allowed them to do. So let me just show you what that would look like. So this is a different VR experience, but let me show you what it looks like for a young person to have agency. And I'm looking at our time. We're running a little low. So maybe well, I know folks will want to see it. So let me just show a bit of Tiffany, who is the young person in yellow and green here, who has been accused of plagiarism by her teacher, Mrs. Cirilda. Okay, so what I just wanted you to see there is that when Tiffany came into our virtual space, there were 3 different behaviors that she showed out. And so we were the psychologists that were responsible for coding those behaviors based on the literature. Do you feel anger? Do you feel numbness? Do you feel resigned? What are the different ways that being discriminated against shows up for young people? And if young people had the opportunity to be in a safe space and show what they actually want to do, what would they select? So here throughout this virtual reality experience, this character has the ability to choose their path. And what we ultimately want to see is whether things like embrace impact the ways that young people choose or have agency over what they would want to do. All right, so we're nearing the corner, and I want you to make sure that you have these questions ready to go for our chat, so be thoughtful about that. But I just want to show you what's next for us as well. So we know that young people are spending an incredible amount of time on their phones. Some studies suggest 10 hours or up. They're turning to apps. And so what we're thinking about is what are the challenges that apps have for young people, and I've spoken about that in several media spaces, but also what are the things that apps can actually do that young people are searching for. So we developed something called Teens Navigating the Talk, and it is an app that young people can use to assess how they're feeling about their mental health, but also what types of racial discrimination experiences they are facing. So is it a direct form? So did someone follow you perhaps in a store and say something to you? Is it vicarious? You saw it on the internet, for example. Or is it interpersonal structural, as we've been talking about? So did something happen at your school that is a part of a series of mandates or policies? So you can come to this app and actually unpack the same way I'm asking y'all to do in this chat. To talk to us about what you're experiencing. And then we give you tools, knowledge, awareness, and skills so that you're able as a young person to combat some of these experiences. So here's a quick video of my...
Now let's reflect on how all this information connects to your life. If you've experienced direct racism, what does it look like, felt like, sounded like? How much has it been on your mind?
So again, we ask young people these questions, we help them to process, and they're using this app for good. The last thing that I'm thinking about are policy initiatives. So I just want to point your attention to what the American Psychological Association has laid out for our task as psychologists who are thinking about the impact of trauma across generations. And that last phrase, restitution and repair, is what I've been thinking about in hopefully a forthcoming book that I'll be putting out. But I want to just highlight some of the things that our own organization has told us we're responsible for. So in the first paragraph, therapy. So we've already done that through Embrace, right? We've started to infuse racial conversations in our therapy. In the second paragraph, evidence-based interventions that resources and educators and school systems can use to target discriminatory school policies and biased instructions. TNT, for example, as an app can help us to really solidify and identify what those processes are that are happening in various spaces like schools, or the VR example where we're using a school as the case study. Those are the ways that we are already supporting this initiative. And finally, the APA asks us to utilize our research and applied science to mitigate, that means to reduce the factors that operate in these various systems for young people. So again, we've already developed a training program that is reducing the burden that mental health professionals even bring to some of these systems. So we are on top of what the APA is doing. And in the book, I will talk about other reparative strategies that we need to be mindful of that takes into account history, takes into account policy across our nation's legacy of racism. So putting that all together and making sure that we have time for some questions at the end, we have these individual, social, cultural, institutional, systemic levels of where racism lives. But the work that my colleagues and I are doing is across all of these levels. So we're not staying at the level of just psychological intervention where embrace might live, but we're really thinking about where can all of our programs fit in to combat what racism is doing to the psychological well-being, particularly of Black children. And I'll end with this. At a time where I'm being asked to be silent about some of the words that I'm using in my grants and in my research, that's not going to happen. So during the pandemic, even when we had to change entire structures and systems to be able to do the work that we were being called to do, we did it. We figured out ways to go virtual with some of our programs that led me to young people that you see all the way on the right hand who saw me on the news and wanted to chat, and they're 5 years old, and we had a conversation with their family. So it doesn't stop us, and in fact emboldens us to think about how do we do what we're supposed to do just in new and creative ways. So I'll close by saying this is my mom in the middle. And I asked her yesterday, what is it that you would want me to say in this talk? What is it that you're looking forward to hearing? And she kind of flipped it on me and said, I'm actually just surprised that we still have to have these conversations. And to my mother, I would say that her mother, who wrote this poem in 1946 on race discrimination, thought, I'm sure, the same thing, that her daughter would not have to have these challenging conversations in her life. And when my mom in this middle post showed up and protested after an experience that George Floyd unfortunately went through, but that we all saw in that change an entire nation, I'm sure she hoped that she wouldn't have to have these conversations with me. But when I wrote this poem in high school, I was already experiencing hurt from racial discrimination and understanding how challenging race and racism is for young people. So my hope today is that we don't have to keep having these conversations. Put me out of a job, y'all. Don't make me do this research anymore. But that means that we not only have to have these conversations in our groups, that all people, all families need to be mindful of how to have conversations with their children so that no one perpetrates this violence towards Black children anymore. So with that, I thank you so much. Please let me know what's on your mind in the chat. Let's get some questions going. And please remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel. So y'all, we've got 7 minutes. Let's go. What are the questions? And thank you all so much for continuing in this chat. I see you. We'll get a little Beyonce while you're writing.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too. I break chains up on myself. Won't let my freedom rot in hell. Hey, I'ma keep running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
Okay, so Beyonce gave you time to think of your question. I appreciate all of the thoughtfulness that you all have already been dropping in the chat. So thank you so much for asking this question, Fong. So where can we find the TNT app and how can we bring embrace into our community? Such a lovely question that I totally didn't pay you for. So the TNT app, we are doing our second level of study. So we've already done a first level of testing with young people when it was developed, we co-created it with young people. And then we wanted to ask young people what they thought after it was developed. So we did that first level. We took their feedback, built it into the platform. And now we are doing a fuller study of like 1,000 young people nationally to get a sense of what their thought is in the app. So it's still in beta testing stage, but our hope is that after the next few months or so, when we finish up this testing, we'll be able to give it freely to young people. My desire would be to team up with pediatricians, for example, hospitals, so that there's a QR code that young people can scan when they're going to their pediatrician visits, or that the APA, our American Psychological Association, will be able to put in their resource spaces. So that's the hope for the TNT app. With respect to Embrace, we are launching it in Harlem next semester, but next year. And we're really excited to think about the ways that it has had to change over time. So it's about an 8-year-old program now, and we have been, with the help of Dr. Sean Jones at VCU, who you saw several times throughout this presentation, he had a group of young people look at the manual. They're revamping it. We need to think about places like New York, where parents and children might show up separately or not even come together at all to sessions. So how do we ensure that young people are still getting the skills that they need to process some of this when life looks different and when time changes? So we're in the midst of building that back up, but this will be an initial pilot so that we're able to then freely, again, give it to folks who want it, and we'll be teaming up with different folks. So just keep your eye on my website, where we'll be offering opportunities for that. So thank you, Fong. We've got a few more minutes. Let me keep rolling. Dr. Ford, let me get my glasses. Y'all act like I'm a spring chicken here. Dr. Ford says, we know that there are so many advantages to proactive racial social. Are there any downsides or considerations parents and aunties should have in engaging in this practice and process? Thank you for that. So certainly there is content that folks can say, and we've seen it in the chat where folks have described some of the challenges that have come up with the socialization process that their families have engaged in. So there is not, I can't cut and dry and say, unfortunately, here are the 5 things you can't say, right? But what my argument is about competency is that this is a more mindful practice, and it allows us to be thoughtful about what we actually want to say, less reactive, less resigned, and more along the lines of, let me get my weight up, let me figure out the resources, let me figure out what's around me so that I can help my young person to process. And what I would say, Dr. Ford, is that there are things that we can do to engage in inquisition and inquiry, which is less about what we say and more about how do we open up the space for our young people to process. So again, I'm going to give you more processes and strategies than what exactly to say or not to say. But that practice tends to work better from what our research shows than here are the prescriptive things to tell our child. So I'm hopeful that that's helpful. Yes, we do have certainly discrepancies on parents of various children in different backgrounds. But again, what I will say about where competency lends itself a bit more, Dr. Gay, with respect to biracial children, competency, whether it's white, Black, Latina, or Asian families, this is the work that we've been engaging in the past few years, tends to be a much better predictor of outcomes than what we say. So once we're able to think about how families engage in skills, confidence, and stress, it is a better way to address your child, regardless of your own racial background and regardless of your child's racial background. Like getting to that point of inquiry is much better than here are the 5 things to say or not to say. So thank you for that. Okay, when should we start having these conversations with kids? So folks who have a lot of young people in their family, and this might be our last one, I will do a screenshot of all of these to ensure that I address those questions. But the answer is as early as possible, because we are, again, years behind where they start to make sense of it. And I use this little metaphor all the time. If your kiddos and the people around you who are young people, if they know that the Starbursts that they like are the pink and the red ones, because obviously no one likes the yellow, orange is questionable. But if they're able to do this with their Starburst, they get the concept of discrimination. They get it early, right? So they're discriminating based on what they like and these flavors and that gosh awful yellow that they just need to change out. But anyway, they're understanding the basics of it. And so once we start seeing and hearing that they're saying, that person looks different, that person drinks chocolate milk, that once we start hearing that they're picking up on these things, that's the time to ask, oh, really? Tell me more about that. What did you notice? Tell me how you came to that understanding. And there are plenty of books and resources that will help young people as early as 3 to have these conversations. So no excuses, y'all. We can do this. All right. I'm a woman of my word. It is 1 o'clock. I want to thank you all. So yes, Pink Starburst hashtag forever. I really want to thank you all so much for spending time with me. Please, when this video is finished, go ahead and send it out to the folks in your life who need to hear a bit about family-based practices, racism, and mental health. But again, many, many thanks. Have a wonderful rest of your day and take great care. Till next week, y'all. Bye.